Donald Trump and his followers have been waging war against the protests going on, calling them illegitimate, denying they understand what they're actually about, trying to have people across the country see these protests as fundamentally domestic terrorists. Just yesterday, he tweeted that the Seattle protesters are domestic terrorists. The thing is, so far, it doesn't really seem to be working, because the movement he's going up against is far more popular than he himself is. In a recent poll, 53% of Americans support Black Lives Matter, only 25% oppose it. That has increased 12 points since mid-April. So in less than 2 months, it has shot up significantly. By a double-digit margin, BLM is more popular than either Donald Trump or Joe Biden. Although in their defense, BLM is apparently the single most favorably viewed national political organization or politician in America right now, at least as of this poll. More popular than any individual Democrat or Republican, a point more popular than Obama, more popular than the parties themselves, the Tea Party, all of that, and certainly more popular than Donald Trump. That's what he's going up against at this point.
And still only at 53%.
Well, it's America. And after all, they're saying something very controversial, like, please stop killing black people. That is divisive in 2020.
Though, hate to say it, in Los Angeles, they did choose a district attorney candidate who is the reason that Kaepernick started kneeling.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I gotta say.
Yeah.
Prosecuted 0 killer cops in San Francisco, and is collecting a police pension and was a former head of. So, but I don't put that on the largest Black Lives Matter movement. I put that on some pretty weird decision making. But by and large, a lot of people are just saying, yeah, they do matter. Mm-hmm. Is that controversial? And so there's a lot of, and that's what it means to people by and large, is, do you think that Black Lives Matter? And the argument trying to be made by the Trump administration and others is, no, this is Antifa. They are all Antifa. Yeah. And that message is failing.
Yeah, well, a few different things. So one is, it's not BLM, it's Antifa, or whatever. It's radical leftists, or whatever. Trying to say it's something other than what it is. But even, like, this is sort of their second big national go up against BLM. In the first, like, Black Lives Matter is such an obviously non-controversial thing to say, that if you are part of a party that is literally bragging when your candidate gets 8% of the black vote, wouldn't you just say it? But they responded with, all lives matter.
How about just a compromise?
What the response was.
How about just a compromise between those two sides? And everyone, they need to say all Black Lives Matter.
That's probably fine. It's probably fine.
All Black Lives Matter.
But no, so look, to some extent we're joking around, but it's also a serious question. Why didn't they just say it?
Well, I don't know.
I
mean, I'm happy to know that it's easy to find racists. Like that's the reason people
You're saying that they will identify themselves effectively?
Yeah. That's it. It's so easy to do.
It would have been so simple.
But it's like when people say all lives matter, it's like when people say, like, well, the Civil War, there were people in the North who were trying to ruin the Southern economy. That was part of people say that. They think they're just like getting you on some kind of semantic discussion. But it's like, all right, so go on with your argument. I guarantee it's not going to end with, and slavery is bad, and we should stop being racist. Like, when you start with all lives matter and then you start discussing things, you're trying to eventually say, even though your first words were all lives matter, which would include Black lives, by the end you're just like, but no, they don't.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's easy for me to identify them.
And think about, in terms of messaging, like, I'm gonna be charitable to the right and say that they are, at least hypothetically, like, they want to appeal to non-white voters. They don't want to do anything to get it, but they want them to be wanted by those voters. And so they had this opportunity to admit that this brutality is obviously unacceptable, and they declined to do that with All Lives Matter and now attacking the people protesting the streets as terrorists. And so what have they come up with as an alternative? Like, their best thinkers online, Charlie Kirk tweeted, "The Republicans freed the slaves."
And by God, Charlie Kirk will not rest until he gets them all back in chains.
Exactly, that's a good tweet. But, okay, I get it. I think everyone watching the show understands some of the things historically that have shifted a bit since then. And their other guy, Ryan Fournier, was like, the first, I think, dozen or 2 dozen black congressmen were all Republicans. Again, because the political realignment hadn't happened yet. Like, it's like, how does that seem to you to be a strong point? I honestly, look, I think that Charlie Kirk is an idiot, but I think that he's smart enough that he must know that black Americans aren't reading that and thinking, oh, good point, let's switch. I think it is just a thing you say to reassure some white voters that you're sort of on it.
But there's a difference between all lives matter and this is going to sound really terrible, but it's simply a rhetorical messaging point. There's a difference between all lives matter and defund the police. If you don't know what someone's talking about and they say that all lives matter, your first reaction is, well, of course they do. If you don't know anything about it. And that is where people first meet. A lot of people first meet the concept. Finding a term that is that seemingly reasonable people would agree with. It is charged and horrible, the reason they came up with it and what they're trying to do. It's also like death tax. Like death, I don't want to pay a death tax. I want to pay a tax for dying. Defund the police is the opposite of that. Defund the police, while it is engaging, people are like, what are you talking about? What? Their first reaction to it is, why? What do we without? If police don't have any money, how do we have police? It's going to be anarchy. Now, everything that people say afterwards is a great reason, and I love all those tiles that people are sharing on Instagram. They're saying this is exactly what they mean. But when folks are calling out like the term defund the police as opposed to a people's budget, I want a people's budget. Mm-hmm. I want a budget by the people, for the people, messaging like, I don't want to keep paying taxes so that people die. I don't want to pay people to kill black folks. Mm-hmm. That's a different message. That's something that immediately you can get behind. That's the subtle difference. I went on Crystal Ball's Instagram when she was trying to make the opposite of this point. And I was like, it's like, remember when Tobias is an analyst and a therapist, and he put the term analrapist on his card. Like,
I can't wait to see where you're going.
I know what he's saying because I know that he's both an analyst and a therapist. Mm-hmm. But if I just saw that without any context first encountering it, I would be like, oh my goodness, you are a psycho. Like, what? Because it says anal rapist. Like, that's what it says. And that is an extreme version of what's happening there. Now, that said, I will do my job of advocating for the changes in funding of police departments to increase public safety and stop funding a police state. Mm. And so, I mean, we've got that term out there. We're going to do the good work of communicating what it means. That's the only point that I would like to make about like coming up with terms like that, and how when those very same people complain, when the very same Democrat left, or not Democrats even, but like left leaning on the political spectrum people complain about Democrats coming up with stupid messaging that isn't as effective as Republicans. Mm-hmm. Then you fall victim to the same thing where you have messaging that isn't as effective as Republicans, because Republicans start with a term that is impossible for reasonable people to disagree with.
Maybe. Look, I think I understand what you're saying. I do think that we have to bear in mind the context where to the extent that people will ever be focused on this topic, now is when they're focused on it. If it is a difficult conversation to have to explain all of what's encapsulated by that term, at least now is the best time to have that, because people are actually paying attention to it. They do largely lean towards that group, and the opposition right now is coming across like a bunch of fascist ghouls. So they certainly have that on their side. And I also think it's
just the proponents and the opposition. The point of my statement is to say that there's people who are like, wait, what?
No, Brett, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying those are two contextual things that will play into how the conversation will play out. And also, I think to some extent, it's a bargaining thing. It's like, what's your starting position? We often say that Democrats often go into these sorts of fights already having a center-right position, then it only drifts right from there.
But that's not what I'm saying either. Because I'm not saying the position needs to be any different. No, I'm saying I get that. The way you, and it's just now I feel like an idiot because, I wasn't the person who I respect way more people trying to get a message like defund the police out than someone who isn't trying to do anything, and someone who's advocating for different goals, more moderate goals. I hope that came across. It's just, if we're having the discussion about the term defund the police, and as it relates to Black Lives Matter being that great messaging, like that is great. Is Michael Che's like matters? It's just matters. That's the word, and that's brilliant. And it starts there, and behind it is so much more, and so much, and has unlocked such a necessary advocating of solutions, and has gotten people behind it. It has been successful. And I do understand and respect that defund the police is an attempt to take that next step to make material changes to police departments across the country, to make it so that they stop doing this thing that is so terrible. These many things that date back to pre-Civil War that are so terrible.
And as you alluded to, we will see how it plays out. We, as journalists, people who try to educate people about what's going on, will make sure that people know. That's the contribution we can make.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.